My name is Vaziri, CEO of BlockPass. I'm a blockchain lawyer, been in the space since 2013, and we have an identity solution called BlockPass. Today we have talked about what is decentralized governance, a little bit about on-chain, off-chain, and the distinction between the two. Now we're talking maybe more practically about transitioning into a decentralized governance state. And we have a great panel of leading experts. So I allow, first of all, the panel to introduce themselves and to give their views, initial views on what they think decentralized governance is and what that process will be to transition.
Hi, my name is Matan, an architect of DAOstack. And DAOstack is basically a general, adaptive, modular, upgradable framework for governance, and then the entire toolkit on top of that, including a native interface. And we're just now running a couple of pilots for early DAOs. Yeah, my view generally is that everything that can be decentralized will be decentralized. I think that over time we'll see more and more sectors acting more effectively as decentralized organizations.
Cool. So I'm Luis from Aragon 1, which is one of the two teams working on the Aragon project. And the Aragon project aims to create decentralized organizations that work and are easy to use for everyone. We also have a suite of developer tools for developers to create dApps on top of Aragon. And I would say it's probably the easiest way to create a dApp today, both from the UI perspective and also the smart contracts. Super easy to get started with. And on decentralized governance, I think it is not only important in the context of crypto and putting protocols and communities in control of token holders, but also in general because we don't want the next wave of technology to be built by centralized companies. We want it to be built by communities. We want the next Apple, the next Instagram to be built by communities and be common good basically, because otherwise, or stuff like space exploration. And actually one of the projects in Aragon is building a decentralized space agency, which I think is super cool, because I don't see a world where these things are not common goods.
My name is Bansemer. I'm founder of Untitled and initiator of the Distributed Governance Foundation in Athens. The main work I've put into that space was pretty much to try to bring communities together. So I'm really appreciating the work which is done by Matan and Luis from Aragon and all other projects, but I think what is missing right now is the awareness that governance is a problem we all share. It's not a blockchain problem itself, it's not a tech problem, it's a social problem, and it will heavily influence how we govern cities, how we govern nation states, if they are in this form still existed at that time, or how we collaborate on existentialism on a global scale. And I can only emphasize here that we need to be aware of the size of the problem, of the journey we are starting here. That's the very beginning only, and that I hope that we can bring things more together and have a broader communication around that by building a community together.
Hi, I'm Dean. I work for ENS. I do governance and dispute resolution research. I write a lot about governance. And as Tim said, I think some of the things which we are researching or we're working on is going to not only affect what we're doing in this room and what the projects we're sitting here are doing, but it's a radical change which is probably going to be reflected in some of the systems we've seen up until today absolutely be changed. And I think that a lot of people think that it's going to go very fast, but I think we need to be aware of the fact that these things are going to take a lot of years and a lot of intelligent heads more than are sitting on this panel to try and solve these things.
I think I'd like to start with, if you don't mind me playing devil's advocate a little bit, because it's a good way of elucidating responses. But why do we need to fix a system? And why do we think that decentralization is the solution? And what other unintended consequences may be created by decentralization as a result? So are we fixing a problem and then creating another problem? Or what are your views on that?
Well, I think there are many, but maybe I can point to. So one, of course, is about alignment of incentives. So the more a system gets centralized, the less there's alignment of incentives of who run the system, who use the system. And gradually, I think the system becomes less and less effective for the users, as we see, for example, in Facebook. We could have made a much better platform that will be aligned with the incentive of the users rather than just the shareholders of Facebook. So alignment of incentive is one thing, and there is another one which is more kind of like pragmatic, if you wish, functional, which is simply scale. So decentralized system can scale much better than centralized one. So right now, a centralized organization is an organization that simply becomes less and less effective as it grows, effective in decision making, in participation, in engagement, and that's basically the bottleneck for scaling up organization. And the centralized organization properly can scale up in principle indefinitely.
So what you're saying is a decentralized, like the kind of monolithic corporations that start off as innovators and effectively get to a point where they can no longer innovate. What you're saying is the model of decentralized governance will allow that innovation to continue and sustain itself. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right. This innovation, operation, decision-making, engagement could be scaled up indefinitely and become, just as a network effect, become more effective with scale rather than the opposite.
But does it retain the quality of being able to innovate and serve the people?
Right, so yeah, I believe so.
So what we're saying is the current system, there's a lineage in time where you start with an organization that's highly innovative, highly serving its users and representing them to a point where they no longer serve. And so if you start off decentralized, you'll be able to sustain that.
Correct, because you can maintain a lot of interest on a wide scale effectively.
What do you think, Lewis?
Yeah, I think going back to your point, I think you're right in pointing out that, first of all, like, do we need this, or are we just solving problems that we have created? And a part of that is it's true, like, we are creating smart contracts, and then we figure out, oh, it makes sense for them to be upgradable, and then it's like, oh, who can upgrade it? It shouldn't be used like a single address because then it's centralized again. So we are creating governance for that, right? So we are, in part, fixing our own problems that we have created in the first place. And when that kind of stuff happens, what I really like to do is think about user personas that needed this like 40 years ago, or like 20 years ago, or like even now, and not in necessarily crypto community. So we have this post about a lady in Venezuela called Maria. So Maria is someone who is 12 years old, likes to code free software, and wants to interact with everybody in the world. And the legal system and the kind of establishment in Venezuela doesn't let her have the tools to interact with outside people, doesn't have the tools to do governance at the end, right? You set up like a company or set up like some kind of project to interact with other people and revenue from that and get out of poverty. So that's where tools for decentralized governance will also help. Not only at the macro scale of how do we govern lots of projects with lots of token holders and thousands of them, but also the micro scale, like how does someone have access to governance, which is not currently monopolized by governments.
So essentially, I'm an innovator, I'm an entrepreneur. If I want to start my venture, I need to set up a corporation. And if I do that, then there are certain requirements around how I can do that, and I may not have access to that. And so that's maybe a bureaucratic problem, okay? But what you're also alluding to is that maybe the economy today is not a localized one. If I'm in Venezuela, maybe I want to cooperate with someone in Nicaragua, and someone in Africa, and someone else to fix a very niche issue within the internet economy. So you're saying you're going to provide the tools to make that possible and lower that barrier for essentially entrepreneurship.
Yeah, exactly, because I think there is a kind of censorship that we are not thinking about, which is currently governments are monopolizing governance and the creation of governance structures. And for example, when I was 15, I was in Spain, I tried to create a company because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And then the government told me, you are 15, you are not 18, you cannot do this. And that's huge discrimination, and you feel really underpowered when that happens. So, we should try to break all our walls.
But Lewis, frankly, are you an outlier? How many 15-year-olds want to create $1 billion company?
Well, not a lot of them, but there are people like Maria in Venezuela who cannot even, I consider myself I've grown up in a first world country in Spain. And if I had those kind of problems, imagine someone in Venezuela, which cannot even start a company at any age because of how corruption works there, and how you can just say, your company is now expropriated and part of the state, and then you're gone.
Okay, I want to challenge you on that idea. Hello? Yeah. The first point here is just putting a legal hat on for a moment. It's not because you did not create a corporation according to local laws that if you do collaborate with someone else, that the laws no longer apply. In a certain context, if I, over the internet, say to someone, will you cooperate with me to start a new venture, and we're going to share money and share the profits, that would be considered, under the jurisdiction where I may be, for example, the UK, as an informal partnership, which has a grounding in law. It's just that the procedure in setting that up had no bureaucratic process, that it was done in substance. What I'm trying to say is that there are other provisions in law that actually permit an informal organisation being established, and that there are rules around that organisation. So I think maybe to an extent the law is not preventing you from doing this necessarily. It's just certain types of laws may not recognise it in the same way as a corporation. And so what you're trying to do is create the framework, or formal framework, around that. Because a partnership, by the way, is a very kind of abstract notion, and it's very vague who has the rights and obligations within that. But you're trying to make that more visual in a way. Okay, Ether hits this account, it's distributed to everyone pro rata according to the amount of tokens they have. So the efficiency and the clarity around an informal organisation.
Well, I think it's that, and also that there are some use cases which cannot do today with the legal framework. Like, for example, we've been talking to our lawyers a lot about we want to transition most of the funds that we have raised in our token sale to the network, right, to a DAO. And they are like, okay, but who is the DAO? And I'm like, well, it's 0x, whatever. And they say, okay, but who has the ability of this? And I'm like, well, it's a smart contract. Like the bylaws, like the permissions that the smart contract has, the way the DAO is set up, will decide how the funds are spent. So there is no single beneficiary of that. And that breaks the legal system completely. Like there's no way that can happen. Or for example, Ether, when you pay for gas, and as a company or as a non-profit, we pay for gas. What are we paying for? Is there any contract? Not really. When you pay the gas, you don't even know who's going to receive it on the other end, who's going to be rewarded with Ether. So stuff like that completely breaks the legal system, because it completely breaks how contracts are made in the first place.
Okay, great. Tim, what are your views about whether we are actually fixing a problem, or are we just creating one?
I think if we look at evolution of humanity, we were always in a situation that we created our own new problems. And that's part of evolution, I would say. So it was true in the industrial revolution, when we needed new laws for the steam engines, which were then driving on the streets or doing crazy stuff, with new labor rights and all that stuff. So it's normal. If we are evolving and the environment is changing, we are having new challenges. And this is very true for distributed systems. They have very different challenges than centralized systems. It's way easier to hold somebody accountable in a centralized system because you know who did what, way easier than in a distributed system where you might have 10,000s of people being involved in a decision. Right? So when we speak about decentralized governance, I refer more to distributed governance, because for me it includes the notion that it's that every node or every participant is equal in the abilities to interact with the system. I mean, I might just made that up, but this is what helps me a little bit. The decentralized includes for me a more federated structure, or you try more to take a centralized thing, copy it multiple times, and then you have a kind of decentralized thing. But this is a wording thing where people might disagree. Regarding what is required, if this is required, it's absolutely required, because we see that the current governance models we have on nation states are failing. They are failing with the complexity and acceleration of change. They are failing to address global issues like climate change, mass displacement of people, and they are failing especially when it comes down to governance of global systems. If we speak about blockchains, those are global systems. Blockchain for me is the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure which is hopefully the backbone for a society of the future, so for 10 billion people plus, and which gives us hopefully the ability to participate, but a fair ability to participate independent where we are from. So this means that everybody can join, get a self-sovereign digital identity, has a voice, can interact with the economy, with the financial system, with the educational systems we are building on top of those platforms. And with that, just to elaborate on the next level there, I hope we can build communication infrastructure which are social networks, which are free, which are owned by peoples, which are community governed. But to do that, we really need to ask the right questions. And those questions include the question of what are our shared values? Because if we speak about policies, we need to ask ourselves the question, what are the policies, where do they derive from? And what is the world we want to live in? And I'm missing this really in the debate, because it's not about having fun, it's not about raising some tokens, it's about the existential survival of the species on the one side, and on the other side, what is the world we want to live in? So what quality of life do we want to have? And this technology has the potential, it's very powerful. It has the potential, like the advancements we had with radiation knowledge and building H-bombs. It has the knowledge to enchain us in a real sense, or to free us. And it will be down to the architects, so the people in this community, to lead that direction. So there are many problems which are created, many problems we need like dedication, and I hope that we have like hundreds of different approaches in parallel, trying out those different things. But it's very important that we start to be conscious about what we want to envision, what we envision, and how we go there.
I mean, I've got a point to make, which is, we say, centralized companies such as Facebook, which essentially is an embodiment of a community, like 1 billion people essentially using this system. The body of it is a community, but it's controlled by one corporation. However, ironically, that corporation is listed on a public stock exchange. So there is transparency through the fact that you can invest in that company and you can hold them to account. How are you going to make a better Facebook?
Especially when it comes down to Facebook, I think I want to clear a little bit like my perspective of what Facebook is. For me, it's an abusive system which is doing extraction of resources and wealth through exploiting people's privacy. Mainly it's that, so it's a harvesting system which is mainly used also to surveil and by agencies to gather intel, and they have a view like a panopticon to everything, but everybody itself is just seeing his own self and what you show them. So it's a very, very dangerous...
But it's accountable to its shareholders.
Yeah, shareholders, but what they are optimizing for, what is the function, what they are optimizing for? Profits, mainly, and power on the second side.
Yeah, shareholder incentives and community incentives are completely different. The same way token holder incentives and protocol user incentives are different. A company's or corporation's main goal is not to value its community or whatever, it's to grow a big enough market size for it to be able to guarantee a certain percentage of revenue for its shareholders and bind its users into a system which they can't get out of anymore. And be stuck in something which essentially the main goal is to, like, Facebook will talk about their goal being to connect people and whatever, and that kind of is their goal, and the only reason that is their goal is because it binds so many people into their platform with no other option to leave, right? Anyone who pops up and tries to do what Facebook is doing is going to fail, because Facebook has hit such a network effect where the only thing they really need to worry about at this point is their shareholders, because people can't leave, there's no choice.
And also to be aware, Facebook is not only Facebook, it's Instagram, it's WhatsApp, it's Oculus Rift, it's all the other hundreds of companies they acquired. So the network they built and how people are interacting with that network, which is extracting a lot of value through data extraction and privacy exploitation.
Yeah, I'd like to echo everything said here. I mean, the problem is that the economic framework that we are in serves just one equation, just one metric, economic growth, and we cannot serve any other metric. Now, I mean, it may be a problem, for our values, but I think it's actually a much more significant problem right now, because this zero-sum game, the global zero-sum game, that basically I'm only serving my own interest and I have no interest to serve the collective interest, and then we are significantly neglecting the interest of the collective to the degree that we are actually risking extinction. So I think that the only way that we can get over that is by generating a new economic framework where my incentive can be aligned with the collective, which is an anti-rival economy. So I think that's the only way to get over that zero-sum technology destruction game.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit more about whether we're solving a problem or creating a new one?
So I'm definitely on the side that we've created our own problems and we're kind of in a weird circle where we're solving the shit we've broken and then we're going to break more and then we're going to try and solve that again. But I think some of the stuff we're doing is definitely valuable, and I think some of the problems we're solving, the solutions we find, we will recognize that those solutions work to update old systems, which maybe are working for now, but it's just like, you know what, there's efficiency gains here, there's gains on like the outcomes of what happens if we transition to this, so we will see value in that, in doing that. So I don't think it's harmful in particular that we're solving these issues which we've created ourselves. I think it's a requirement of innovation.
To destroy it and to build again.
Well, yeah, that's how we learn, right? We break things and then we fix it and then we break it again, and that's exactly how governance works.
Unless we break too much.
Unless we break too much, but like optimally we break a certain amount so that we can always progress a bit. Like that's evolution, right? We always like, you stub your toe once and then you realize to not walk into the table, yeah.
Right, but we're, for the first time in history, we're in a point in time where breaking can actually be like irreversible.
Yeah. That's the weird aspect to it, right? So the experiments we do, we have to be very careful, especially now with the size of these networks. It's kind of weird when we say, oh, let's experiment on Ethereum, but there's a lot of money behind that. So there's definitely value in these problem solvings and experiments, but we have to be careful on how deep we go and how much change we make, which will affect a certain amount of people.
Yeah, I actually think that's right. But I think we're in a privileged position where we can innovate in terms of governance without people getting killed. Like, for example, like with nuclear bombs and stuff like that. Like, you know, if governments kind of innovate too much, there may be some problems in there and some red buttons that get pressed by some people. And with decentralized governance, like the most harm you can do is like, you know, like make people lose a lot of money, really. Which is it's very harmful too. But like, you know, we kind of avoid these kind of bigger issues like just getting killed by a nuclear bomb.
Maybe you lose 100 million or in a DAO hack.
We get away from the power monopolies which governments hold, right? And can kind of be in our own little sandbox and do whatever the hell we want without the fear of us going to jail and governments using the only disincentivization which they have, which is either to put you in a jail or kill you.
I mean, I have a question, which is, I mean, we talked earlier about off-chain, on-chain governance, and to me, when I think about that, I ask myself, who are the constituents of this system? With Bitcoin, who owns Bitcoin? It's the miners. From my point of view, if they switch off their machines, then no more Bitcoin. And then when you look at proof of stake, people are saying, and there was a big debate earlier, who owns that? It's the coin holders, and everyone else is just on the sidelines, because fundamentally if they choose not to stake, then the game is over. So let's talk about the new problems that we have created. From my point of view, in any normal voting system, there is, you register to vote. You are a constituent, you have the right to vote. And then as by virtue of having a right to vote, you then make your choice. And that choice is a private choice that no one else should know about. But before you do that, you have to go through a registration process. So I'd like to talk about permissionless versus permission governance. I love this idea of a permissionless system, but the incentive problems that were described earlier, which is basically collusion, cannot be addressed if you have a purely permissionless system. So I'd like to get your thoughts on how we fix these new problems we created.
So I think Tim's comment kind of fits perfectly in this. Before we try and solve governance issues, we need to figure out what our values are, what we want to achieve, and who the actors are in our system. And I ask myself this with the permission versus permissionless as well. Is it equality for everyone to be able to vote, or is it equality for everyone to be able to obtain the right to vote? And I think there's a certain difference in it. I feel like sometimes some of the stuff we're doing now, where by default you get choice to vote and right to act in a system, I think a lot of that is going to change, because I feel like most people don't care enough about governance. Most people don't want to participate in governance, and they only really want to obtain the right to participate in governance when things have failed for them.
I think adding to that, I agree with like some users that just don't want to participate because they are too lazy, or maybe like they just don't know, and therefore their vote could actually be wrong. Then I think we are missing the point in which like blockchain enables, like, you know, you have an address, and that can be a human or a fridge or like a dog or whatever. You can literally be a dog on the internet. And the cool thing about that is like 10 years on the road or like 5 years, we may have scripts that you, like agents that vote for you. So you say, these are my 3 values, and they vote for me. And I think that will be super cool because it will enable participation. And then if you reward good participation, then you can have like a node on your home that just votes for you and earns some money for staking or stuff like that. And I think that would be very good.
I think when we speak about like governance systems, there is a very narrow debate, or often a focus on voting. From my point of view, it's not about voting; it's about participation and being part of, being able to express my wish and influence how things are moving around me.
But influence is voting.
Not really, because the governance process happens before voting, right? Governance is making decisions. Voting is only recording said decision.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of an opinion at a specific time. So from my point of view, governance includes the whole process of like signaling issues and needs. It's like proposing solutions and potential path, and also making decisions. So if you think about governance, from my point of view, it includes things like noses, prediction markers, because it can, for example, predict, or it can point out potential future opportunities we can develop into, right? So it also includes like a collaboration and how we find consensus. I would really not like to limit it to voting. I mean, we have very, very like simple systems right now. They are very heavily underdeveloped for doing like all the things I pointed out, because we don't have a lot of transactions, smart contracts. We don't have a good resolution for the Oracle problem. We have Sybil attack problems. So how do we make one person, one vote? All of the things are not resolved, especially not in a totally distributed way. So these are things and questions which needs to be answered. But the core question for me is, how can we enable participation? It comes down to Maria, it comes down to hopefully my children in the future. So how can we enable participation? And then I want to bring that back to the social network example. How do we ensure that the platforms and the infrastructure we so urgently need for communication and coordination from the side of society, how can we ensure that they are fair, and that they are not owned by centralized parties, but public infrastructure?
But sorry, if you have anonymous actors, so to speak, owning the system, how can you say that that's fair?
Yes, so I think with the anonymous actors, we need to take the risk perspectives. So if we go back in a time where we had the Second World War and the fascism is something which might not be super present right now in the Western world, but it might come back. So if we build systems which do KYC the shit out of everybody with like their preference and all the shit what Facebook is doing right now, we can very, very efficiently like eliminate actors you don't like. And I think we will see that again, unfortunately. We will see that increasingly again. We will see that the debate in the US is getting way more extreme on like certain parties, right? And I don't want to participate in building systems which actually oppress other people by doing KYC stuff and so on. So for me, blockchain is a path to decentralize power asymmetries, so or to face them through decentralized systems. If we don't want to face them, we stick just with decentralized systems. For me, blockchain is about distribution of decision making and distribution of power. Right? So it becomes, in the end, permissionless systems. Speaking about enterprise blockchains, is some kind of valuable for getting secure processes, right? So secure digital processes, but it's not answering the question for how we can solve power asymmetries in the current ecosystems.
But the contradiction of what you're saying is, on the one hand, you're allowing open participation. On the other hand, you have owners of the system, well, maybe not the participants, and they may be anonymous and they may collude. So I'm not sure what problem you're actually solving.
Isn't the ideal that you don't really have owners, or that everyone becomes an owner, that everyone can?
Yeah, but who owns Bitcoin? It's the miners. Who owns the proof of stake?
Well, that's
the users own Bitcoin. If there's no users, there's no value for Bitcoin.
The miner thing is kind of like a very naive approach. I think it's very hard to reflect who owns a blockchain, because you have various different actors, and if these actors do not coordinate in a certain way, then it's not going to go right for one group. In Bitcoin, you have node operators, you have users, and you have miners. And like there's been a fork where some miners moved off to something else, and you will see when users want to transition, miners will have to follow, because it's all fun and games if they can mine their own little network, but if no one's using it, then that completely breaks down. Now, if users are trying to use a network where there's no node operators, they will learn that they need to like transition that ownership as well to their platform. So the ownership, like some people in certain scenarios have more power in the ownership, but everyone, it's kind of distributed amongst multiple actors, and in different scenarios they have different power dynamics, right?
So let's cut to the chase a little bit. Like, for example, EOS. It's a good example, right? You know, you have a system that's supposed to be distributed. It's supposed to be distributed. But then this system that's supposed to be distributed has a system that's actually centralizing, or where there could be collusion, etc. So how is that serving? How is that better? How is that distributing power? You know, my point here is we're talking about this in a way it's very idealistic, but when push comes to shove, there are actually few decision makers.
I feel like with something like EOS, we have to look at the morals and values of the Block 1 and the people behind EOS. And I think their morals and values were never really to distribute power. It was to build something which was faster than something else so they can raise money. And they realized the only way to do that is to have their weird little DPoS system. Because pretty much every example of DPoS we've seen, everyone knows it's failed. So if they really cared, they wouldn't have done DPoS. So I think the creators of that system have completely different morals and values than the people sitting on this panel. And I think you'll always have actors like that, where there's certain trade-offs and efficiencies where they can sell a product and they will do it, but they'll still have their little thing unveiled. And as a community, I think further down the line, we'll get better at informing people who are uninformed of these issues and why they should jump to something like Ethereum versus EOS. But as said, we're like very beginning, and a lot of the people who buy into things like EOS, they don't understand technically what the team is doing, and they have a great marketing department, right?
All right, let me shift gears now. Let's talk about what is a distributed system. Can you give me an example of how I might use a distributed system on Aragon and how that might be good for me? Give me an example, please.
So if you're Maria, for example, you live in Venezuela, you want to interact with other person in Iran that you just met through the internet to, I don't know, do some artwork, sell some t-shirts, whatever. Today, you just cannot do that because there's someone who owns the monopoly of governance. If you use a system like this, you can create a community, and you can be part of a community that, you know, like registers some artworks and then prints some t-shirts and has people who like are printing stuff and selling it, and you can coordinate all the actors and you can basically participate in the community without having to. Well, I cannot think of another option really. Like if you are Maria and you want to do this, I think decentralized systems are the only way to do it, just because they are censorship resistant, and they are unstoppable, and they are global. I think sometimes we forget that those three properties are the key properties of what we're building.
But does Maria write Solidity code?
No, she uses like a UI. Like in our case, it's so easy to use. Like it's really like a UI. There are things that we still have to fix as a community. For example, signing transactions. Like a user doesn't know sign a transaction, or for example doesn't know if sign a transaction with 0x whatever. That's what Maria wants to do. So for example, something that we did with Aragon is called RASPEC. It's a way to determine how, like, what transactions are doing in a human readable way. So when I call my smart contract as a developer, I put like a small description, and then you can create even like a repo of these descriptions to make sure they are legit, and the software is actually doing what the description said. So instead of seeing, I want to sign this, hex payload, which is hard to read, you see, I want to mint 1 token for this other person. So I think building these kind of systems that are easy to use is so important. And I think we're doing a terrible job at UX right now. It's improving a little bit, but we need more designers, and we need to really focus on this, because otherwise it's going to be like the crypto elite who gets all the benefit. As you said, if you're a Solidity developer, you're cool, you know how to do things in this new era. If not, you're screwed. So we need to really push UX forward.
So can you talk more about Aragon and kind of like what's happening next? How are you, Maria in Venezuela? What about Joe Bloggs in the United States setting up a company? What else does Aragon have to offer in terms of distributed systems?
Yeah, I think for someone like creating a company in the US, for example, like I think there are two different things. One is pure kind of crypto anarchy and decentralized systems. So you create your own decentralized organization, and it lives on the Ethereum jurisdiction, like that's our native jurisdiction. Or the other one, which is you set up a decentralized entity which has some legal representation. So for example, to be fair, like the US or Switzerland, they have amazing infrastructure for companies. So maybe you want to go that route and you want to use a decentralized entity for efficiency and not for censorship resistant, for for it to be globally accessible. Apart from that, I think there are use cases which cannot be done today. So for example, protocol governance, right? You have 0x or you have Maker, and they want to have upgradability over the protocol just because it's a common good, so it should be upgradable by the commons, right? All these parameters, because we're not going to have a smart contract that works forever. And so the question is, who governs that right now? And the answer should be the community. And how do we reflect on that? It's a bit difficult because the parameters can be, as you said, like for example, who owns Bitcoin, right? And that depends on the governance process of Bitcoin, which right now it doesn't have. But like for example, Ethereum or even like other cryptos like Decred, their governance processes might change over time to both, and so you need the community to own that, and you cannot do that right now with the current infrastructure. So I think that's one huge key selling point, which is nation states own the ability to coordinate millions of persons and gather outcomes from governance processes from them. And right now, the only way to do that is decentralized systems, to coordinate millions or billions of people across, a common good to take decisions together.
So Aragon provide templates for protocol upgrades, etc.
Yeah, you can basically create you can even do that without knowing Solidity. You can create I want to create a decentralized organization. You can choose like a template, for example, democratic template, and you set up your voting parameters. Like for example, 50% of people have to vote yes for this to pass, or you can customize the parameters. And then what you can do is you can use give your token holders permission to call these to cast votes, or to in general just execute votes and have their say. And then you can even have stuff which is super important for protocols like treasuries. So in the future, it would be super cool if the Ethereum Foundation puts their $1 billion to work in a treasury and rewards developers for building on Ethereum. And the only way to do that securely is to have the community kind of vote on what are the developers who deserve this part of these funds, and that needs to be governed as well. So you might also want to through a voting.
Okay, great. Can you tell us more about your product and how it's a system with distributed systems?
Sure. So firstly, maybe to refer to your question, so I would say that the distributed system is a system that you can basically remove any agent and still keep functioning in the same way. So it's pretty tricky. For example, we have, so in DAOstack we have, similar to Aragon, we have a very modular system. You can basically plug and play. You can plug out and plug in different governance protocols. So this is kind of like the lower level framework, and then on top of that we have a few other layers in the stack that makes it more accessible for use of real-world applications. So for example, one such layer is a caching layer. So you don't want to read directly from the blockchain, it's very inefficient, so you want to have a centralized, sitting on a server layer that kind of make it more accessible for you. Now you can say that's a centralized, this is point of centralization, but not quite so, because anyone can host that software on their computer, and by that basically you can remove our hosting and then still get the application. So that's what I would define distributed systems. And in terms of DAOstack, basically, as I said, we have the modular governance framework, but then we also are building up all the way to the interface. So they have right now a live on the mainnet interface for operating DAOs, opening the DAOs, exchanging the protocols, and so on.
And what kind of people are using this your product? Who wants to set up a DAO?
Right. So right now we're managing an internal pilot. So we have 70 people actually managing a budget together. So they get $20,000 and they co-manage that budget. And then we're now running a few other pilots. But you can extend that, again, since the system is completely modular, that DAO can do anything else. So for example, right now we're working on another DAO, which is not managing budget, but rather managing the parameters of a platform for decentralized exchange, or a token whitelisting, and so on and so forth. So basically you can use that same modular building block of governance to basically operate anything that you can do on the blockchain.
And have any businesses actually used this system? Have you seen anyone actually using it today?
No, so we're just launched it on the mainnet, and we have, again, we're running right now one pilot, 2 more pilots are coming up this month, and we have a pretty long pipeline of like use cases that are interested to use it, but we're still building it from scratch. It's the early days, so we're moving one use case at a time.
One point I would like to talk about just before we move to questions is, if we're building and experimenting, and essentially this is what it's about, right? This is about experimentation, but no nuclear bombs are going to go off. Maybe we lose a lot of money. But when businesses are involved and you lose money, then it has legal consequences, and it's not quite as fun. So when we are thinking about embedding distributed systems into the real world, what are the constraints around that? And how should you think about a distributed system when you want to integrate it to the real world? Like, for example, let's rethink the DAO hack. If I'm going to launch that smart contract, today, and it's for real, it's not just we're not just doing this for fun. It's my business, it's the DAO. What should I be thinking about when launching this distributed system?
Yeah, I think I want to jump into dispute resolution right now, because it's a very interesting theme in terms of how do we cover these losses, right? Because someone has a loss, as you said. And so I think instead of falling back to legal frameworks that are, existing these days, which are clearly not working for crypto and they are unfair, like, you have a lawsuit for like your child dying from food disease, and you sue Nestle or whatever, and 7 years on the road you may get something, or not, because you just don't have the money to pay lawyers. We need to create a new system which is blockchain native and allows for dispute resolution. So when you enter into an agreement with a smart contract or a DAO or someone on the internet that you actually don't know, you may put some limited liability there, some collateral that you can use in terms of, if there's a dispute and you have to, basically, the smart contract loses for your money or stuff like that. And we are very lucky because, one, we can do this, and two, we can create super complex systems in terms of smart contract security. So you may even create insurance for smart contracts. And you may even create a league of Solidity developers auditing code and having them stake onto their audit. So actually they are aligned for them to be right into their audits and for the smart contracts to be secure. So I think we need this kind of blockchain native jurisdiction that will enable people to participate with pseudonymous identities without having to think about what happens if I need to sue this person. Because you will be able to sue people using a different way and hopefully in a faster and better legal system.
But yeah, that's a really good point about dispute resolution. But when you embed something like a distributed system and it will have real-world consequences, a dispute resolution is there to deal with some of those consequences. But how do you prevent those consequences? Are you thinking about, for example, being able to shut down a smart contract if it goes wrong? What should the business think about if they're integrating a distributed system?
Well, I think to start, and I will then pass the mic. I think to start, a lot of businesses will not want to be in this new legal framework because they are already in an existing legal framework. I think these kind of blockchain native jurisdictions are good, and they're really signed when you are creating things that couldn't be created in the legal system. So new communities, new online businesses, if you want to call them that, and I think that's where they already sign. Because being into the legal existing framework and the new one, I don't think that's going to work because they are different words. It's like telephone and in the web, they just don't work together. Then I'll pass the mic.
Yes, I don't think you can ever get away from some of these consequences of doing business and whatever, because you can't even get away from it in the centralized world. We've accelerated our problem by putting it in a decentralized world where we don't know who we're interacting with and stuff like that. We've definitely complicated that, but you'll never get away from these issues. We can get better at processes and certain formalized processes around, for example, dispute resolution to handle these things, but it would be impossible for any of us in this room to be yeah, this is how we get away from it, because it's not going to happen.
And also to add to this, I think we make a huge mistake if we just replicate the same infrastructure as we have currently into the blockchain. So I think blockchain is having natively a different economic model, or it enables a different economic model, which includes zero margin economic models, which are infrastructures which are owned by communities, which have huge advantages in the way how they deliver services, huge advantages in the costs which are connected to it, and by not outsourcing additional costs to the commons. But that said, I think we're still in the very, very beginning. We still have not really a clue what this will evolve into. And I think we are doing way not enough of tests. So Vlad pointed out that we have huge risks when it comes down to governance experiments. I think we need way more low-risk, say, tests in the real world. And there are some very, very interesting sweet spots where we can try out distributed governance models in the real world, which are namely smart cities. So there are a lot of smart cities in Mainz which are waiting for people to come with self-digital identities and votings and voting protocols. We have distributed boundary systems where you need to legitimize decisions, where you can raise issues through signaling. So it's a perfect testing field as well. We have the DAOs and the DAO frameworks. I think we should spawn a lot of them. And I think it's super important that we share that knowledge. As we have heard from Decred, from Noah, for example, they do on-chain governance. I think a lot of people are not really aware of their experiences. I think it's super important that we coordinate in the community, that we have a shared problem here, that it's important to exchange ideas, and also to maybe do joint experiments in the real world. Right? But we need to really bring this down into real-world experiences and trials.
Great.
I'd like to play like a devil's advocate. I mean, I think that what you're raising is a real concern and something to be aware of. It's like still an open question. So, for example, what if tomorrow there is a new DAO generated of 30,000 people, and that DAO manages some money and then assassinates some people? If it's like truly distributed, there will be no way to correlate that to a single person and to hold it accountable. So these are open questions. I think we should be aware of them and admit that they are open to a large degree.
I think the problem with those, though, is that we know these questions are around, but we haven't run into the issue. And there's no point in us solving these things because we don't know how the scenario will play out. These, like with fund recovery right now, you have the issue of EIP 999, which is still open because no one knows how to solve it. It will be solved when someone has figured out a formalized somewhat of a process which is legitimate to either side of the groups. And the only way that can happen and something like that can happen is if you have these two groups, right? The only way we can figure out a solution which works for both parties is when both parties are there and there's something at stake. So us like trying to figure out dispute resolution stuff before we have conflicts which need to be resolved is kind of impossible. That's not how things evolve.
Great. Any questions?
May I comment that? I mean, it's like, I disagree from the point of that if we wait until like shit hits the fan, we might have too much at stake. And regarding assassination markets, which is I think a plausible scenario, I hope that the Ethereum community and the core community has values which ask for a hard fork in this situation. But it will mean how often you do hard forks because of situations like this, how many DApps are deployed, how often you need to react to it. So I think it becomes infeasible to resolve that problem from that angle. So I would rather prefer to see that we come up with social smart contracts in shards, which are governed by smaller communities, which might make those decisions. But that's not a core protocol decision. It shouldn't be, from my point of view. That's level 1 protocol. Don't touch it, right?
Right.
I just want to quote Luke Duncan from our team on that, on what you said, Tim. And he said that you can build democracy and anarchy, but you cannot build anarchy and democracy. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for these core protocols like Ethereum to be neutral, as you said.
Yeah. You don't want a hard fork for everything.
No. so there's like the notion of net neutrality. We can agree on level 1 governance. Don't touch the nodes, don't even care about what is running on them, because governance is happening in the shards or in other systems in the namespaces. It enables that we can build government-compliant shards. I mean, hey, yeah, okay. I wouldn't be like super keen to be in a Chinese shard or whatever, but you know, we can build them. And now we could have shards which are free of this governance influence.
A user watching online has asked, governance is about fiduciary duty. What do you understand your fiduciary duty to be, and do you feel the pressure of fiduciary duty, or is that a distant thought?
I couldn't really understand it, sorry.
Yeah, the user's asking about fiduciary duty.
Fiduciary duty. So it means if you're a director of a company, you owe a fiduciary duty to the company because the company cannot look after itself. And what that means is a duty beyond just looking after it.
I think it's about responsibility, right? I think it comes down to the point that we need to be aware of what is the responsibility of being architects of the systems. And I think those systems will be for probably everybody to use in the future, as it's like a decentralized web, but I think there's a responsibility.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, extending to that, if the architects of the systems have to have duty for everything they create, I think that would be a very bad way to kind of, enable innovation, because I don't want to make myself responsible for everything that people do now, the same way that, Tim Berners-Lee shouldn't be responsible for everything that happens with the web.
I agree, but I also think that for like the same reason, it's also connected to the discussion that we had before with on-chain governance. I think that generally I would say that reputation systems are more, they are less permissionless, but they're also more accountable. So that's why at least I would promote more reputation system rather than token voting, which is less accountable and prone to more problems.
I think it comes down to responsibility in distributed systems. We need to ensure that people are responsible. How exactly we do that is difficult to answer. When we look at Twitter, people do horrible things they wouldn't say in the real world to a real person standing next to them. And this is this detachment we create through the digital world. We need to come back to the situation that we feel responsible and accountable, and it doesn't mean directly being that everybody is tracked or surveilled. There are other solutions in that, how we can do that.
So when you talk about accountability, you're talking about knowing who those people are. In other words,
I disagree. I'm saying they have an identity. It doesn't mean that you know their name, but they have a point they interact from, which is of value for them, which they don't want to destroy reputation with. For example, it doesn't mean that you know that what my name is. I can have thousands of identities in thousands of different contexts. It's just important that there is a point of interaction with, which is representing me, which can be held accountable, where our penalty is if I behave bad. And when I say bad, it comes down to what are the values in the system. Right? What are the policies we derive from that, and what incentives or behavior we are looking for a world we want to live in?
It means they have a skin in the game and they can lose that skin.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the topic of this panel was the transition to decentralized governance, right? And what I'm curious about is what you think about Bitcoin or Ethereum transitioning to forms of on-chain governance. Because when you just start a project from scratch, it's quite easy to implement it. But if you already have a running blockchain, it becomes increasingly complicated and difficult. So for example, Decred started with on-chain governance, it's running well, but if you are Bitcoin or Ethereum, how do you transition to a form of decentralized governance?
Why would you even try to do that? From my point of view, is Ethereum and Bitcoins are very interesting proof of concepts. There is no need for them to transition. I think they have value in the way they are. And if Ethereum manages to upgrade their model to proof of stake and so on, we'll learn a lot from that. If we think we need different systems, we should just build it from scratch. It's way easier. We can learn from all the things we have seen before. So I wouldn't see the need there, and I see a lot of resistance in those communities to even do it. So I wouldn't try it. If we build systems which are better and which can fulfill the same vision of Ethereum or Bitcoin, they will be substituted anyway, right?
I mean, just personally, it seems to me more risky than promising. So.
Yeah. I mean, if we had to move to on-chain governance, we would, right? Ethereum's governance, as much as everyone likes to shit on it, has been working quite well. So there's no reason for us to change it. So I think when the need arises for us to change it, people will slowly start to change it. Our governance process has not locked us into the inability to evolve, right? So we can still evolve if need be, but there just hasn't been any incentive for the system to evolve. I mean, there's certain subcategories where we can formalize certain processes, but that doesn't require the entire system to switch to on-chain governance. So maybe when someone recognizes that there is that need for that, there will be that push, but up until then, it's kind of weird to talk about how we will transition to that because we don't need to.
Yeah, I also think there is a huge difference between protocols like Bitcoin and Decred. I think with Decred you have on-chain governance, therefore you could assume that innovation is going to happen faster. With Bitcoin it's the contrary. You have a small change in the block size, and you have 2 years of political debate until something happens. And that's an amazing value, because if you want to have Bitcoin as a very great and strong store of value, the less changes and the simpler, the better. So, although I love decentralized governance, it's not for everything, and I think stuff like Liquid is amazing for some cases, and Bitcoin is amazing for other cases too, because it's unchangeable.
Well, I would also say that fork is a decentralized governance. It's just a slower one. But for Bitcoin, the slow one is good.
Yeah, if people wanted to change the system really badly, they would have forked and changed the system.
And they do it all the time.
But yeah, they would if they need to.
I think it's very important that we identify the spots which should change very slow. And core protocols is the area where we probably want to have slower changes, because a lot of things are dependent on it. And areas where we want to have fast changes, which I see more in the higher order governance models, like in the shards and the online communities in the DAOs. And regarding Bitcoin, I think it's good that there is no such thing as on-chain governance right now. I think we shouldn't even try it there. So we should do it in those tech environments and where we can really try and get the experiences. And if we figure out that this is the way to go, because we see a huge amount of benefits there, I think the adoption will happen anyway.
Great. Well, that brings. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah. That's flat. Don't give it to Vlad.
So I wanted to go back to the topic of responsibility. Some of you were saying that we can achieve preventing unwanted outcomes by having some collateral, so that people don't want to do that thing. But now Manan was saying that sometimes there might be an outcome that you really don't want to happen, like an assassination, and these are invaluable outcomes. So what I wanted to get to is that there are some outcomes that happen in the physical world that we cannot undo, and it's very difficult to say we're going to have this amount of collateral that it will cover this. So maybe it will help for the debate to start making the distinction between the digital world, in which we can count money, we can count value, and the physical world where some outcomes cannot be reversed and cannot be valued.
I mean, it's kind of like a hard question to answer, because if we take the context of assassination markets, those existed on the internet as well. Now we need to check, are we the people building the protocols which allow people to actually host an assassination market, or were we building the lowest level which allowed someone else to build a protocol to then do an assassination market? Protocols can have their weird way of censorship, but should that be on the protocol level? That's like saying the people who were at whatever research centers when the internet was invented, they need to be responsible for every website which gets put up, which allows you to buy drugs or order hitman killing. Like, there's a huge difference in that, and I don't think we need to be responsible for all of that.
I was not getting to that. It's, for instance, if you build a whole governance system that eventually will command people to attack another person, and then...
Well, are we looking at like blockchain level governance?
No, I'm talking about what you can achieve with governance on top of blockchain, and if you think that by simply having collaterals we will prevent war, that's not going to happen.
Well, no, because people can opt out of their collateral, right? You need that on like a weird layer 1 if you ever wanted to prevent anything.
Maybe just say that I think what we said, at least what I say, is that there should be a skin in the game. There are different kinds of skins in the game. So collateral is one skin in the game. Pseudonymous reputation system is another, yet I think deeper skin in the game, and then KYC is even deeper skin in the game, because you'll actually be identified and being kind of like charged at the legal system. So I think different use cases may require a different level of skin in the game.
But just my point of view on this, as from a legal and also from the point of view of us building an identity system, if someone is ordering an assassination market, okay, and has other people backing that, we cannot sit blindsided to this problem. We can't just say, oh yeah, well, it's technology. That just is irresponsible. People should be accountable, but the process of accountability needs to be clearer as well. And from my point of view, and I love decentralized systems, but I don't want to create assassination markets. But I also want to ensure that there is identity and there is accountability, and it goes beyond pseudonymity and reputation systems. Ultimately, if something goes wrong, someone has to bear the consequences in the real world. But the process is how you do that. You can't connect identities to blockchain. because if you do that, then everyone will see who you are. Okay, but from my point of view, I like the idea and the ethos and everything, but there are technical challenges at the moment. But if we continue down this direction of just sticking our head in the sand, that is not the right type of decentralized governance, because it's not governance. Full stop. It's just chaos.
I mean, we need to
disagree.
like what level?
No, I think it was an amazing question in the sense of if someone the root of that is if there's collateral, there's any skin in the game. With a decentralized system, you cannot go to someone, break down their door, and take them to jail for life. And I think that's both very good and very bad. And I think in the case of, since I raised the part about collateral, how we are architecting this digital jurisdiction that we are building, the Aragon network, is that you have some collateral with the network and it can get slashed. And the only thing we can do in the network is really slash people and fork them out. So if you don't agree to the constitution, to the values, then you're forked and that's it. You lose your reputation, you lose all of that. And that's the only thing we can do, really. And I don't think attaching that to real world makes any sense, because, as I said, I think the good and the bad part is that we cannot get someone into jail for life. And I think that's probably better than what we had right now. And it was a lot of bad stuff, like destination markets, for sure. But I think it's overall better than what we have.
And maybe to make it clear, assassination markets exist today. All the other bad stuff exists today. There's a reason why this stuff exists, because like a very, very small fraction of humanity, some people are just detached with the morals somehow, so they like to do bad stuff somehow. So we have evil people, we have incredible evil people, but they are like a minority. So like less than 1% of people are probably very evil. And on the other side, we have 1% which are angels, right? So I really believe in humans. I believe that most of humans are really having good intentions and are helpful. So I think we should not be determined by this less than 1% how we interact or how we build those platforms. We need to be aware of it. But in the end, when we create those systems, it's like when you create a knife, you can't change the intention of the person taking the knife to stab somebody. This is the decision of that person, right? So what I'm saying there is, it's a social problem we're speaking about. This will not be solved on the technical side. It's about how get we people to be passionate, empathic, caring with each other, right? This is a social thing, and then we reduce the amount of people getting crazy with that technology. If we are, as a society, insane from that point of view, so we like to have wars and assassination markets, hell yeah, those things will evolve. And in a democratic sense, if the majority of society is in that way, it would be even democratic. Weirdly enough, right? So what I'm saying is, we need to ensure that we don't mix it up. We need to ensure that we're not determined by that small percentage of evil things which will happen with it. They will happen, they exist today, and we will not be able to flush them out fully. We need to be aware, where do we do governance, and hopefully we do that in the online communities, which make that value decisions, that social contracts, and have the ability to fork and to react to those things.
Just to add a very quick final note, you all latched on the assassination market. I say it's any decision that has impact in the physical world, because it's also about coordination. You may decide that you're going to build this building here, and it just happens so that it's where some family is living and you're crashing their lives. So it's not only about harming people purposefully, it's the consequences that we may have in this physical plane.
I think I agree with you, and I think it's actually important to say that there are some limitations to this approach, and to acknowledge that and to have the discussion open.
Great. That's a really interesting and difficult debate at times. But thank you very much to our panelists, and I hope you got something from that. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for all the speakers. And